Hi, good evening, everyone. And I'd like to talk to you about how to speak to your children about coronavirus. Obviously, we're all feeling extremely disoriented and anxious, and our children are looking to us for guidance. And I'd like to share some thoughts, and I hope you find it helpful. I'm speaking to all parents, but specifically to parents. Perhaps your oldest child is now just becoming a tween or a young teen, and you kind of don't feel ready for all of this. You're not accustomed to the idea that your kids are looking to you for this type of leadership. I know when 9/11 hit, I was 41 years old. My wife was in her high 30s, and we were suddenly faced with adolescent kids and who are really terrified, as we were. And it's always this balance about projecting a sense of calm, being realistic about the reality of what's going on, and finding that balance is really what it's all about. Not only did I have to lead our family, but I had to lead a yeshiva, a growing yeshiva, and coach the parents speaking to their children. What I found it very meaningful is a discussion between Moshe Rabbeinu and Aharon HaKohen, Moses and his brother Aaron. They had just finished building the Mishkan, the tabernacle for God's presence, and Moses was the leader of the Jewish people, and his brother Aaron was the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and Moshe Rabbeinu. It says that Aaron stepped back a little bit, and he sort of wasn't ready to lead. There are commentaries, the Mefarshim offer different interpretations of why, but Moshe Rabbeinu says, Krav el HaMizbeach, go to the altar, go to the Mizbeach, L'kach nivcharta, this is what you were chosen for. So I speak to all of you as parents, really. I'm flashing back to those days following 9/11. Step up, and ready or not, like it or not, this is your time to really lead your family well. So just some practical tips. Educate yourself before you have this discussion. There are fantastic resources online. Just do a simple Google search for how to speak to your kids about coronavirus, and I propose that you'll find some really good tips. Most of them basically speak about the same issues, which is encouraging you to have the talk with the kids. Obviously, the talk, could be, you'll mention things that might be frightening, but we know as adults, sometimes it's more frightening not to know. And especially now, especially if you have adolescents who are, into technology, there's so much information out there, and they count on us to help them sort it through. So certainly feel encouraged that you should have the talk. You should share information in an age-appropriate way. Obviously, you're going to have a different discussion with a 5-year-old as you'll have with a 15-year-old. Read up as best you can, and don't be afraid to say you don't know. If they ask you specific questions, by all means, be honest. If you have a relative who's a nurse or in the medical field, or a doctor, you certainly can encourage them to call, to ask these questions. You might want to do it together with them. It's great modeling to find out information from a professional. If you don't have the answers to all the questions, always be truthful. Always be truthful. This might be, if this is the age of your kids, this might be the first time they're really looking to you for this type of guidance. And your word is your bond. You're establishing a lifelong relationship with your children that hopefully will continue to come to you after they're adults. And this truthfulness, never to say something that's not so. Don't exaggerate and say things like nothing's going to happen and we're going to make sure you're safe. You really can't. So temper it. We're going to do whatever we can to keep you safe. But don't promise things that you can't deliver on. We're going to do what we can to keep our family safe. Children typically, the research shows that kids feel very empowered when they feel that they're able to do something. Being helpless and not being able to do anything to protect yourself is frightening. So explain, for example, with this coronavirus, talk about hand washing, why it's so important, and why we do other things, and why the community made tough decisions to close schools if your schools are closed, or to not go to shul. All of this is extremely disorienting for them, but explain to them that this is all being done as an abundance of caution, because we want to make sure that you're safe and that everybody is safe as well. Let them talk. Let them talk. Make sure that you provide venues where you're not doing all the talking. Let them talk, and always be open. Express to them clearly several times at the beginning, during, after. They should feel free to come and talk to you about anything directly related to this or anything else that's on their mind. There are no guarantees in life, but one thing you can almost be guaranteed of is that it's not going to work exactly the way the script tells you to. You read the information online, and hopefully it's really helpful, but expect the unexpected. I know with my own conversation, it was actually quite funny. I had a great laugh the day after 9/11 with an incredibly stressful day. I did my research, and I read I had an assembly with the students the next day, and I was speaking to them very candidly about following these tips, listening, all of what I basically just told you now. And at night, I was getting some feedback from parents. Some parents called to thank me for having a talk with the kids. And everybody I spoke to, I said, so tell me, what was the feedback from the kids? And one of my oldest students in the yeshiva, his name was Kovi Raskin. His father's name is Tzvi. So Tzvi tells me, he says, Rabbi, I just want you to know that I asked my son, how did you feel when Rabbi Horowitz spoke to you? So he said, I was really feeling calm. And by the fifth or sixth time he said that we're going to keep you safe, when he kept on saying how safe we're going to be, that made me really nervous. So again, it won't follow exactly the way you plan it to, but this is, you expect the unexpected, and it's important to understand that just like grieving it doesn't go in a straight line. God forbid we suffer a loss, loved one passes away, or any other loss. It's not a straight line. We don't all of a sudden, we don't grieve less every day. It hits us differently at different times. So it's really important to understand that your children, in all likelihood, it would be surprising if they didn't, at random times, they might feel much more anxious than they did before. And you just expect that. I'm saying expect the unexpected. I remember by 9/11, one of the things that struck us was that our kids didn't want to sleep alone in their bedrooms. Some of them at some times, and we were ready. Try to keep an upbeat tone at home. We made sure we had, we played patriotic songs in the house. We try to keep an upbeat tone. But again, you do have to expect people to express their anxiety differently. One thing that was very great interest to me as an educator and someone who's trying to comfort my students was listening to the adults talk about what frightened them most about 9/11. And it's important to understand this because sometimes many people experience the same thing. It's the same stimulus, the same thing that makes them nervous or sad, but they express it in different ways, and they even think about it differently. I'll give you an example. We had a wonderful resource teacher. Her name was Chani Wolfish. She supported the 40 weakest students in our school. She was just an amazing human being. I said goodnight to her at 4:15, and God forbid, she was tragically killed by a freak accident by a car. She was dead already at 6 o'clock. And the next day I went in and spoke to the students. We had professional grief counselors, but I made sure that I had FaceTime with them afterwards, and they were able to talk to me. And they encouraged me to ask the kids, to talk to the children about how they were experiencing their grief. And everybody said, they each said something different. One of them said, that they miss her very much. Another one was afraid for himself. He said, she kept me in school. I don't know what I'm going to do without her. Another child expressed that he misbehaved the last day she was alive, and he was inconsolable. So the same thing happened. They lost their teacher. They experienced it differently. And I remember by 9/11, as I mentioned, listening to the adults, one of the things that struck me was, I don't know why, of all the things, I remember our two boys were in dormitory yeshivas, and they closed down all the bridges and tunnels. I couldn't reach them. And I remember, going into a strong box and taking out their two passports and putting a few $100s in cash in there. And when I went to see them, as soon as they they allowed us to get in there, it was about 10 days or so, I brought them their passports. I'm getting emotional. I brought them their passports and some cash, and I just had this, because we were expecting, God forbid, another one to come, hoping it wouldn't. But, I remember so vividly that experience. I said, my God, it's like Europe all over again. Like, that you read about, these parents giving their children their papers. And I don't know why that frightened me, that to my core, more than anything else. So your children, expect them to experience this in many different ways. They might be worried about you. They might be worried if is it ever going to get back to normal. And project leadership. I would encourage you. I think it's a great exercise. Listen or watch different elected officials get up and talk, or different doctors, or experts in the field. Some of them, as soon as they start talking, you feel a sense of calm. Like they know what they're talking about. They don't promise the moon. They might even tell you things prepare yourself. This and this might happen. It might get worse. But there's a certain sense of leadership that comes with being truthful and honest, and having this inner core of values. In closing, just two thoughts. One is, on a spiritual level, I don't profess to know why things happen. And quite frankly, I'm extraordinarily distrustful of anyone who says they know why things happen. Nonetheless, I do think that spiritually we're certainly entitled to, and perhaps have an obligation to think of a positive takeaway message. Not why did it happen, but what can I take away from this experience? I think that is an extremely appropriate way to think about things. And I think, this distance that's caused by this coronavirus, being separated from our friends, from the public at large, and not having this physical contact, not shaking hands. I was thinking over. I was lecturing in Teaneck this past Shabbos, and that was my message during my talk in shul, was about being reflective and appreciative of our friends, appreciative of our communities in a way that we might just take them for granted, value our relationships. Another thing that also struck me, that we sometimes rely on a handshake or a pat on the back and a physical contact to have a silent communication with our friends in that way, and not having the ability to do that. I was thinking all Shabbos about what words would I express to someone, to try to use our words, to try to be able to appreciate the ability to express our affection and love in different ways. Your children are watching you. This was something that really struck my wife and I while this was happening. And when the kids were asleep at night and we would talk among ourselves, one of the things that we kept on saying is that, they're going to remember this, just like we do. I'm sure they all remember it perfectly. And they're going to, we could model resiliency. That's a really important message to parents, especially young parents. You have the opportunity to model resiliency for them. They're looking in your eyes, and the way you take this, if you're able to manage to follow these tips and to conduct yourself in a way that's uplifting and inspiring and being there to comfort your children, they will learn resiliency from you. And they will draw back on this, even if they don't think of it directly, and they might not think of it for 20 years from now, but it becomes part of their hard drive. I was at a Covenant Foundation they had an awards dinner this past winter, and they had just an extraordinary presenter. His name escapes me, and he was talking about the resiliency, and that he's a professor in Harvard, and he did a study on resiliency, and he had this idea that having grandparents and having a close relationship with grandparents improves resiliency. And he had a real, research study that confirmed that, and it was fascinating. His presentation was spellbinding, and one of the things that he said is that having grandparents around, you inevitably listen to them tell your family's story, how they struggled in Europe or through the Depression or whatever it is, and you wind up listening to them talk about their experiences, and 2 generations later, we're still here. So I think you do get to model resiliency. I was very fortunate. My mother, Aleh Shalom, was an extraordinarily resilient person, and that really was something that I draw on today in terms of getting through difficult times. And finally, talk to your kids about values, and that's something that you might not get the chance to talk about in day-to-day stuff, when things are quiet and calm. Talk to them about our faith, about our trust in Hashem and God, about and saying things like that your for example, the value of your life is not measured by what you have or what you've done for others. It's these core values that and the faith and resiliency that you get an opportunity to talk about these types of things in a way that you may not have. So again, I encourage you all to travel on Mizbeach, step up, become educated about this, have talks with your kids, let them know that you're someone they can always talk to. It's so valuable. It's such a valuable lesson for life. And again, I really wish you Mazel and Bracha. I hope and I pray, as we all do, that this will pass relatively quickly. Be a source of strength for your children. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it helpful. Good Shabbos, everyone.